Well, build my gallows and build them high. Makes a long time climbing before I die. I want the chance.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Longbangers podcast. I'm Matty.
Morning, I'm Colin.
We're joined today by Patrick McPartlin and Liam Bryce from the Hibs Observer. Patrick, how are you doing this morning?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. But it's an early start for us on a Sunday to be doing this kind of thing. So thanks for, I presume, getting up out of your bed especially for it. And you know, everyone would normally be having a long lie on a Sunday. So,
of course.
Yeah. And Liam, how are you doing?
Good, mate. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Thanks for coming on. And our podcast today is brought to you by Leith Spirits. So with no football on, it would be a good time to get Patrick and Liam on from the Hibs Observer, just kind of get a flavour of how you guys feel the season's gone and how things are going with the Observer. So, Liam, I'll come to you first. How do you think the season's been so far for Hibs?
Well, it's a wee bit, I think, underwhelming is probably the word that would come to us. I sort of came in and started covering. It was just after Lee Johnson had been sacked, and I think but I've kind of been to a couple of games here and there covering before that. I think I was at the Luzerne home game and the Motherwell away game, which was two of the most polar opposite performances that I think you can imagine, and. I think I got the initial feeling I got when Nick Montgomery came in was that I was really quite impressed with him. His first press conference, I think the first game I went to, I thought you could see right away what he was trying to implement. It was clear, and it looked potentially as though it was going to be quite exciting. And it was one of those things where you were like, right, okay, this is going to need work, but you could see what he was trying to do. You could see where it could possibly go. But I just think maybe in the months since, it's not really progressed anywhere beyond that. It's still it's looked for me like, this could be, there's something good. There could be something really in this. The way he's trying to play, what he wants to do with the team. So I think it's a wee bit kind of underwhelming in that sense. Obviously, a change of manager a couple of months barely even into the season is never ideal. And as for where it's going to go in the new year, I don't know at this moment in time. I think it's hard to say. It depends maybe a lot on the transfer window and how much impact the injured guys can make when they come back in. So I think still potential for it to turn into a decent season, but I think certainly from my perspective, it feels as though it's been a wee bit underwhelming so far.
We did an episode on this. Was it last week, Colin, or the week before? But like the sort of the season so far, and underwhelming was probably like the kind of key word that we come up with as well. Patrick, what about you? Same question to you.
Yeah, I think it's been frustrating. I think that's the sort of word for me. That you can obviously see there's been some improvement since Montgomery came in. There's been things that have been better. I think off the field as well, there's been, it just feels like there's a better atmosphere at the training ground. The players seem sort of happier, and it's having so many things in place and they're not quite been able to get it over the line on the pitch. And I think when you look at games like the Ross County home game, the goalless draw with Dundee at home, the St Mirren away game when they equalised late on, and you think it's really a matter of minutes or, just one individual decision away from things being a lot better or looking a lot better than they currently do.
I said that the other night, actually, Patrick. We were talking, I can't remember what we were talking about, but Kilmarnock, his first game as well, was another one. The amount of games that we've sort of snatched a draw from a winning position. And even if you leave the derby as a defeat, right, because that's what makes everybody feel like this, I think. Or it clouds a lot of it. Those, if you turn them into wins or keep them as wins, we could have lived with the derby defeat. I don't know if that's the right phrase, but it wouldn't have felt as bad because we would have been in a much better position. There's so many 2 points thrown away for those positions.
It's been weird, I think, genuinely, like how many sort of just marginal things that Hibs have come down on the wrong side of. Some of them their own fault, some of them not. But you'd think, maybe they've used up all their bad luck in the first half of the season, and maybe
never runs it.
No, shaking your head. No, right. I'll retract that idea before it goes any further.
Yeah, Let's manifest it.
Optimism will never catch up.
We wait like it was always like the derbies. That kind of you'll get they'll all even out in the end. I think we're due about 30 years of good luck at some point. Keep waiting for it. The obviously I was listening to your YouTube video. Can't remember what day that was. Thursday. Talk about transfers and the activity they needed by Hibs. How big a window do you think this is, Patrick, for Hibs?
Yeah, I think it has to be fairly significant. I think just because, like you were just saying, there have been so many sort of almost moments in the first half of the season, and I think when you look at a squad, I mean, I've described it as a Frankenstein squad based. It's made of like players from so many different managers, and sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. There's an argument that the manager has to get the best out of the players that he's got at his disposal, but I don't think there's anyone out there who'd argue against bringing in sort of between 1 and 3 sort of really good players who can just sort of lift the team sort of collectively, but also bring in a bit of individual brilliance as well. And I mean, you can discuss what positions they might need to be in, but I think you look back to last January, and it was really just the kind of bringing in Jimmy Jeggo and CJ Egan-Riley, which just had such a not transformational sort of effect on the team, but certainly the second half of the season was a lot better. They went on, those unbeaten runs, and again, if it had been for fine margins, we'll call it, then they might have been in a better position come the end of the season. But I think with the Bill Foley stuff sort of circling in the background, and the fact that it's Nick Montgomery's first transfer window, the fact that Brian McDermott's now been in for a fairly healthy period of time, I think it sort of does. They kind of need to pull a rabbit out of the hat. I think either by bringing in not necessarily a big name, but bringing in someone who is going to get the fans excited, or bringing in players who are just going to be able to make that difference on the pitch. And I think it's been a bit of a sort of it's been quiet so far. Obviously, there's the trialist in Dubai, but I think talking about bringing in 1 or 2 players and talking about loans and things like that, the fans are in a bit of a downer. So I think there's sort of like a bit of a need for Hibs to sort of do something that will not get the fans back on side, but kind of reinvigorate them a little bit. Some sort of inspiring transfer business could make all the difference.
I think we were going to cover this in our extra time episode, Colin, which is like our subscriber episode. Nick Montgomery did a piece with Hibs TV. Was it yesterday before? And actually, if you read into his comments, Liam, I'll get your thoughts on this. For the way that he described the transfer activity, it didn't seem like we've got much of a kind of cohesive plan. He talked about trialist, the boy Adrian. I think they found over in Dubai. Montgomery said he was training over there at the same time, so they've brought him in for a trial, which in itself isn't a bad thing. We can have a look at somebody, but the rest of it was about Brian McDermott and Nick Montgomery phoning around agents to sort of see who was available. Should that set alarm bells going, Liam, do you think, or is that normal?
I don't. It's hard to say. I think, and what I would say is that in general, if you're going into January and it's being described as a big window for you, I think that alone sometimes sets alarm bells ringing for me, because I know it's almost a cliche at this point, but like it is a difficult market to navigate. It's difficult to do significant business, and if the rest of your season is hinging on it, that is kind of alarming in itself, because it's just not a great time to have to really make significant changes to your squad. In terms of forward planning, I can't claim to have any great insight on that, but like I think you get to speak to Nick Montgomery kind of every week, and it's long before the window that he starts getting asked questions about transfers, and he was always quite vague. I think at one point he did say, there's no, not so long ago, there's no serious conversations taking place, and then that kind of maybe shifted to he got asked, what would be the magic number for you this month, and he said, I think 4 was the number that he put down. So it's I mean, it'll be clear. I think every manager of put that to the director of football and the board, I think long ahead of time. But yeah, I can understand if people are a wee bit concerned that we're now halfway through January and it's not been any kind of significant movement. But I don't think you can just gloss over the fact, you can't underestimate the fact that it is hard to do good signings in this window. And I think like 4, maybe, I don't know if there's going to be 4 at this point, but I think see 1 or 2 of the right signings can make an incredible difference. I think we talked about this on our YouTube channel the other day. If you can get guys who not only improve, a better standard of player who can come in and play well, but it helps other guys improve as well. I think there's some guys on the side who are not getting the best is not being brought out of them at the moment. And I think with the right couple of additions here and there, you can not only get better players in the team, but you can get more out of other guys as well. So it's definitely a quality over quantity type thing. But at the same time, I can kind of understand if people are, it's midway through January and people are starting to get a wee bit tetchy at the lack of significant movement.
Is that because, though, as well as that, a lot of the transfer window stuff gets done at the end? Like, so although we always think, January window, it'd be good to get them in for this sort of pre-season, mid-season break thing. But we need to wait on, like, a block being moved somewhere else for it to all start falling into place. And that happens generally in the last few days. Because kind of Sky Sports demand that happens so that they've got a TV programme out of it. Like, or other reasons, whatever it is, I don't know. But it always happens at the end. So it's a hard window as it is, but then you've kind of got to wait to the 28th before anything happens.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the case with certainly with loan players as well. A lot of that movement kind of kicks into gear towards the end when, if clubs will, I think if they're thinking of sending out guys on loan, they will want to get people in first before they start thinking about, okay, we'll give you the green light to go. So there is, and Nick Montgomery did say that a couple of weeks ago, to be fair, there is an element of having to be patient as much as you'd like to, have had 2 or 3 guys out in Dubai, getting in amongst it right away.
I just don't really have that many folk, Patrick, to punt out on loan at the moment. Really, the first team squad's pretty thin as it is. How much of an issue do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at how many players are out on loan currently, and you think that's there's already quite a lot. But I thought it was interesting last season when Lee Johnson was sort of making a point about the squad being kind of quite bloated, because I agreed with it. I agreed with him. Mm-hmm. I thought it was kind of, there were a lot of players there, and I thought you can't keep everyone happy, and you kind of need to have a bit of a smaller squad. But it's almost got to a stage now where it's too small, and obviously injuries haven't helped. But at the same time, when you're relying on 16, 17-year-olds to fill the bench, then that's when you start thinking you've maybe gone too far in the opposite direction. My kind of gut feeling about all this is that, and it's been exacerbated by how kind of open Lee Johnson was when he was talking about everything. I mean, you'll have seen his press conferences, pre-match, post-match. There was always a lot of background information. There were anecdotes. There was sort of stories from his previous management jobs. And I think Nick Montgomery is very different to that. I think he's quite a private guy in general, and I think he's kind of brought that into his approach to management, where he doesn't really give too much away, and I think he's quite happy with that. I don't think there are some managers who obviously have a very good relationship with the press. They're happy to tell them things sort of off the record. They're they have like a laugh and a joke with them, that sort of stuff. Then you get the managers who are a bit more reserved, maybe don't give away as much. And I think that's Montgomery. And I think from the fans to experience going from a manager who will just say anything and everything to a manager who's actually quite guarded and quite. I think he thinks quite carefully about what he says and how he says it. And I think that's maybe part of it, because I think this talking about transfers and saying, we're looking at 1 or 2 guys, we're phoning around agents. I mean, it'd be the easiest thing in the world to say, actually, we're not, we're looking at this guy, we're talking to these people, we've got 4 boys in on trial, we're going to get somebody on loan from the City Group, for example. And I just don't think he's that kind of person. And I would have to say, with Brian McDermott's contacts and his history in the game and his experience, and Nick Montgomery's contacts as well, you just think there must be more going on than they're letting on. I think there has.
I hope that's right, because I kind of said, I think when we spoke about Johnson going, I was like, I hope we kind of get a manager, because he got ridiculed on Twitter and on the message boards and all that, and it was used against him. And I thought, I hope we just get a manager that comes in and says nothing. Like Johnson would have been out here going, he was in Tavares and he was telling everybody it was like everybody in England wanted to sign him, but he came here and I was getting managers phoning me saying, how did you sign him? Or no one caring how good he was, and then like barely played them or never played them. And it was like, it built up the hype. on them, which then they just sort of set them up to fail. Whereas I think we've had the polar here, we're getting nothing at all, and we're worried about that, and it's almost like, where's the middle ground? Like they just sort of tell us a wee bit of the truth, but obviously don't drop your cell in it so that you lose the deal because you've let it out of the bag. That's kind of where I am, because like Johnson got on my nerves with all that. Like I'm one about on here regularly. Like, or I say Johnson, the club, I think as a whole, would hype up players to the extent where they were never going to match that expectation.
Yeah.
And I think they just kind of need to be a bit more box a bit cleverer. Is that what cleverer?
You want like the announcement tweets to just say, "Don't get your hopes up."
He's all right. He's all right. We're hoping potential.
Yeah, Montgomery. He's definitely, obviously, clearly much more guarded than Lee Johnson, but I think he is also. I would say he's probably one of the most guarded managers I've come across.
Yeah,
he's like. I mean, he's perfectly. He'll answer your questions. He's. He is good to deal with in that sense that he comes across as a good guy. But he is quite guarded in what he gives away. He's like, it's even in if you weren't comparing him to Johnson, he is very guarded. He's not like, he's definitely not going to give his verdict on what Sharks think of Mondays. Put it that way. Do you know what I mean? Like you're not getting any of that film.
We've noticed that he does. Like if the question, he sort of answers the question, the question with the elements of the question. Is if you were to say to him, "How vital was that win today?" His answer would be, "That win was vital today," and that's pretty much what you get with Montgomery. And then he'll kind of just add like a little bit of detail into the back. From a journalist point of view, what do you prefer?
You want it's. I think it's guys like Johnson. It's he makes headlines and he can make headlines in his sleep. It's so. Every word that comes out of his mouth, you could get a story out of almost. But I think the flip side of it is if you're going to his, I think Patrick could probably attest to this more than me because I didn't really cover Hibs much when Johnson was in. But in terms of then having to transcribe all the quotes from his press conference, and there's only 8 hours in a working day. Montgomery's maybe a bit more economic in that sense, a bit less work to plough through. I don't know what you think, Patrick. I think it's nice to have a bit of both. I think not a guy who's just going to go on and then you end up binning half of the stuff that he said because it's not useful. But I think it can be difficult trying to read between the lines of what Montgomery's trying to say at times, and in some ways it makes it a bit more difficult. But I think it's just the kind of character he is. You know what I mean? He's just not really interested in the. And as much as you'll be nice and stuff like that, he's not really interested in sort of playing the media game, if that makes sense. I think.
I don't know if you know this, but was he like that in Australia? I don't know if you've got any idea what he was like over there, or is he coming here a bit more guarded because he's maybe seen and heard about what the previous guy was like? I don't know. I don't know if I expect you to know that because that's Australian guys, but I wonder how he covered this, handled himself over there. Although there's maybe not as much scrutiny over there, I don't know.
I think from my experience, he's been very much Montgomery's been very much kind of focused on the here and now. Like he's not interested in what went on before. I mean, I'm sure you'll be aware of it. I'm sure you'll have been told plenty of anecdotes, plenty of background information. But it doesn't strike me as the kind of person who would kind of tailor his behaviour based on what had gone before. I think it's just the way he is. I think when you see sort of clips from his time at Central Coast Mariners, he is very much the same kind of person. I think from my point of view, it's really about trying to find a happy medium. And I think you want a manager who is prepared to kind of talk about things at length, but not kind of go so far off at a tangent that you're thinking, what? We had that a lot. Like whether it was with Lee Johnson, he was very happy to talk about this app that he'd devised that had kind of Guardiola and Klopp and Mourinho's tactics on it, and there was just a lot of background stuff, and you thought this isn't really relevant, and you think is this to sort of cover up something else? Is it like what's the purpose of this? And I mean certainly like Lee Johnson was the kind of person who would drop so many hints in what he was saying that there'd often be so many hints that you'd sort of think afterwards, like maybe a couple of days ago, oh, that was a reference to such and such, like whether it was players, signings, pointed messages to the board, perhaps, stuff like that. And, he was very much, I mean, I remember sort of spent an hour with him just kind of one-to-one, probably, I think, February last year. And, he was sort of very welcoming. He was sort of talking about everything. He was giving me a lot of background information, some of it not for public, but, there was a lot of information. He was more than happy to, talk at length about different subjects, whether that was, kind of transfer interest or kind of, targets that had kind of fallen through the cracks, if you like, for whatever reason. And, there's just you get some managers like that, and maybe his sort of experience, as we know, he's managed over 500 games. Maybe that is
new information. That
maybe that sort of leads a manager to be more sort of open with the media. They're more comfortable, whereas Montgomery's still relatively new to it, and I just ultimately think his focus is more on the players and the coaching, and he's not sort of too fussed with the kind of circus that goes along with it. Like, he's not, he's never tried to be our friend, basically. And some managers, you get that sense that they're trying to almost ingratiate themselves, like, write nice things about me, give me positive headlines. But I don't think we've ever had that from Nick. And yeah, I think it's like you guys were saying, it's maybe a kind of breath of fresh air from what's gone before. But then, you do want a happy medium, and you don't want a manager who's sort of borderline sounding defensive. And I think that's, given the way that results have been recently, I think that's kind of where it's sort of, if it's not already there, I think it's in danger of going there. And I think it's just times like this where, you maybe need to have that little bit of media savvy. And I'm not saying Montgomery doesn't, I'm just talking in general terms here, that, just to be able to say something that is going to be the focal point, and that's what people are going to talk about. It's what the fans are going to discuss on message boards. It's what's going to make headlines. And I'm not sure we've had that. And then as a result, you get this sort of 10-minute video from Dubai where, it's all, we didn't have enough players for a friendly. We've got these boys in on trial. There's nothing else. And what should be a kind of positive update, we're hearing from the manager for the first time since, the start of the year, becomes, that was a bit underwhelming. And there we go. There's that word again, underwhelming. So
yeah. It's been like that for a few years for Hibs, the whole underwhelming thing. How do you see the rest of the season going, Liam?
I think getting a few guys back in, like getting the likes of Cadden back in, I think Lafondra and I think Doyle Hayes, if you can get them to stay fit, I think these guys will make a difference. But it's just whether they can get to grips with, the style of play. I think and get back to, I think, that first couple of weeks where it felt like Hibs could maybe go score 2 or 3 every game. I think if they can get back to something, resembling that, maybe tighten it up a wee bit in the back. I think, aiming for third, is that maybe a bit too much, a bit too far gone now. But certainly, I don't think there should be no reason why they're not aiming to get back into the mix for Europe. I think that's still definitely achievable. There's just no. It's the same. Always this league that there's very few teams outside of Celtic and Rangers who ever put together this brilliant run, string 5-6 wins together. It just tends not to happen very often. So if you can be moderately consistent, it goes a long way. And I just think that's what they need to find. Nobody's expecting, I don't think, go win 10 games in a row. But if you can find a moderate level of consistency, it can really go a long way for you. And as I just kind of, come back to the guys coming back, I think, there's kind of certain profiles of player there that I think will make a difference. Lafondra, I personally think he can help get a bit more out of Vente. I think if you can keep Doyle Hayes fit, he's got a sort of a good rounded sort of profile about him. Doyle Hayes, he's a kind of decent all-rounder, I think. And I think if you're going to play the 4-4-2, you sort of need that in the middle of the park. You need a guy who can do a bit of everything. Could maybe take a wee bit of the burden off Joe Newell. And obviously I like Cadden as well. I think Chris Cadden's a good player. And if you can keep him fit and consistent, then I can think he can make a difference. But, as much as the first half of the season has been underwhelming, I still think you've seen enough when it is good. You think, if you can get it to that level consistently, then it can still be a decent second half of the season, I think.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the table actually, see, because I thought it's third out of hand. We're 11 points behind with a game in hand, right? But it was more, those games we were talking about earlier, Patrick. That Hearts, if we had turned those into wins, we're matching Hearts. We've lost the same amount of games as Hearts. It's the draws versus the wins that have really dropped us behind them. Yeah, and that's what we need. That would be that consistency that Liam's talking about, I think.
It has been fine margins, to be fair, in some of these games. Some of it, as I think I said earlier on, has been a bit harsh. Games that didn't deserve to lose. Maybe the odd decision in the late. It's just the late. It was a kind of freak thing for a while. I felt, those late goals. It was just like, how does this keep happening? They seem to.
I wonder if we see that most seasons about late freak goals, and I often think, is it a freak when it happens? Isn't it regularly? It's consistent.
Consistently freakish.
Patrick, one of the things that was mentioned earlier was the Bill Foley investment. Obviously, that's becoming more public. From a sort of journalistic point of view, when a story like that comes along, how is that to deal with?
It's probably more difficult than I think it comes across, because it's obviously it's a big story. Obviously, like, it'd be a big story if it was investment, but when it's someone like Bill Foley with the kind of history he's got with sports teams, and the sort of wealth he has and the wealth that his sort of cohorts have, it is, and what it could do for Hibs as well. It sort of becomes this massive story, but it's really kind of short on details, just because a lot of it there's obviously the waiting game to be played. Having to get it kind of rubber stamped by the SFA and all that stuff. So I think there's obviously a kind of clamour for information that isn't actually out there. It's not just a case of, we don't have the information. It literally isn't out there. And so then that's when I think you try and sort of satisfy that sort of need for as much information on Foley and the investment as possible. And you start looking into people like the Ryan family who, are sort of linked with him through, I can't remember the names through the sort
Black
of
Knights.
Black Knights, thank you. Yes, I was going to say Dark Knights, but that's something totally different. But I think it's hard because it's obviously a big story. You want to find out as much as possible, but when there's not much out there, then it does become a bit, you're kind of sitting there twiddling your thumbs. And obviously, something like this, it's an exciting story. It's interesting. There's a lot of sort of layers to it. Trying to understand sort of how these sort of like it's not just like the financial side of in Scotland, it's America as well, and it's trying to work out these sort of what a limited partnership is and what this means and how much that is, and so it's very kind of technical, and it's certainly something that I didn't get into journalism because I was really good at maths at school, and
same, quite the opposite.
And I think it's you do sort of panic is too strong, but you do sort of think, oh god, I need to get this right. It's the same. You've seen recently with the transfer interest with Josh Doig and the 27.5% sell on. Is that on the fee? Is it on the profit? It's on the profit, by the way. But even that, just sort of trying to figure out what's what, so that you're relaying the correct information, becomes, I think, almost more kind of important for a topic like this. And it still very much feels, there's not really a lot going on until you kind of get the smoke signals from Easter Road that actually, yes, we're all good to go. And that could be within a month. It could be sooner. It could be longer. I'm not really sure how long these things can take. But I think there's a likelihood that it will happen. I don't think there's a risk that it won't. The club certainly seems kind of optimistic about it. Foley, when he's been talking about it, has almost been talking about it as if it's virtually a done deal. So you'd have to imagine that it's just sort of there or thereabouts.
What kind of difference do you think it will make for Hibs, Liam?
It's hard to say. I think there is definitely potential, to benefit from the sort of side of players coming in. I think, and that's the thing that was obviously most exciting for fans. Kind of benefit from the guys who are ultimately, probably one day bound for the Premier League. And I think, just in terms of, I think Nick Montgomery touched on, the kind of investment in the infrastructure, training ground, stadium, things off the park. Just putting in, it could help, I think, really put in sort of, sustainable stuff that Hibs could benefit from over, a period of years, rather than, just getting a guy on loan from a season, just, improving existing processes, existing infrastructure, as I say, stuff at the training ground. I definitely, I can certainly understand why, fans are excited about it. I mean, who wouldn't be if, if you found out, obviously, like an American billionaire is ready to put money into your club. Obviously, I can understand sometimes the flip side of the argument as well. If people are a wee bit apprehensive about getting into, these kind of multi-club structures and maybe, a bit of concern about, I think the one I've seen, people say is, sort of losing some sort of identity, but I don't think it necessarily has to be like that. I as much as I can understand the concern, and as well, just, kind of looking at, in general terms, these sort of multi-club partnerships, ownerships and stuff, it just seems to be the way that the wind is blowing in modern football, and it's going to become more common rather than, I think, this could become the rule as opposed to the exception, I think, in some ways. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. And when you look across it, sometimes you wonder, in what other way could Scottish clubs get significant investment into them other than something like this? I think the one everybody always points to is, we need to get ourselves a better TV deal. The TV deal needs to be better. And obviously, I agree with that, but does anybody really see that happening to any significant degree anytime soon? So, I mean, as long as it's right for Hibs, and obviously, you've still got the Gordons, kind of at the top making the decisions, and they don't. I'd feel like if they felt that it wasn't, kind of right for the club, then they wouldn't be, ploughing ahead with it. I think these kind of things just seem to be the way that, things are moving in modern football. And I think as long as there's a kind of appropriate, distance in terms of, you're not just becoming, the Bournemouth B almost. That's not what you want. But I don't think it would end up like that, to be honest. And I think it can be. I think it can be positive. I really do.
I have to say, Patrick, I say thank you for taking the time to make sure that you're getting things correct and having that diligence. For those of us that listen to Willie Miller and Packy Bonner try to get their heads around COVID, it's a refreshing change.
Or what's the red card? Was it? It was offside last week, wasn't it? I was listening. Man.
Aye. So well done, and thank you for that. I made me forget my own question, which is handy. In terms of, so the Observer launched this last year. Now, how's it all been going?
It's been good. It's been quite a lot of. It's been a big change, I think. I don't think a lot of people know that I literally finished my previous job on the Wednesday and started the Observer on the Thursday. So that was sort of quite a sort of big turnaround.
That was a fun week.
It was, yeah.
Was you already there, Liam? Were you already in place?
Yeah, yeah, they sort of moved me over. I was been working for the Herald. They moved me over. Just basically said, this is the kind of route we want to go down with these sort of subscription sites specific to clubs. And I was all for it, to be honest. I'd been kind of bouncing about doing different things, and I thought like the chance to just have a kind of specific focus on one thing was good. Aye, and we just kind of prepared for it. It was a kind of tight turnaround, to be honest. As I say, Patrick was still working up at the Evening News, and I was actually, I think just before we launched, I was away on holiday for 2 weeks, which wasn't ideal. So we had a space of just under 2 weeks, I think, to try and pull a load of stuff together.
As much as that?
I don't know. It felt like maybe a couple of hours. Looking back, I think we got a couple of weeks, but it was all all a bit of a blur. Not to exaggerate it too much, but yeah, it was it was a kind of stressful couple of weeks getting it all set up to launch. And I think the thing that concerned me the most, though, was we were the kind of all the stuff that the kind of pieces we did in the build up. So we had a lot of kind of big pool of content to put out, and I wasn't in any doubt that we've done some good stuff here. I think we've done some really good work, but I think it's just the fear when you launch anything like this new is like you're kind of like, what if you launch it and what if nobody cares? What if nobody gives a shit? Really, that was my fear. But we were kind of we were really pleasantly surprised by the reaction to it, I think.
Yeah, same. When we launched our subscription, we were like, "Are we doing the right thing here?"
It was kind of you're kind of taking a sort of jump into the unknown, and we were like, because I think there's always been, it's been spoken about for years, and about how there is such an appetite for Scottish football coverage outside of Celtic and Rangers, and I think justifiably for years fans have felt that they're just not getting that from the kind of maybe the national titles who tend to focus on the Old Firm, and it's just but then you always, my fear was like, okay, we're going to do something that's more specific. It's less Celtic. It's not Celtic Rangers focused, obviously, but then you just wonder, is that kind of stuff that you hear over the years that people are crying out for coverage of their club? You did worry, is that going to translate into reality? But we were really kind of pleasantly surprised just by how well people took to it, and obviously we really, if anybody's listening who has already signed up, then we do really appreciate it, because it's made our job easier over the past few months, I think.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where I think on the launch day, when you kind of press the button for everything to go live, it's a little bit like pressing the red button and thinking, oh God, what's going to happen? Like, how's this going to go down? I mean, I was like Liam. I think I was sort of quietly optimistic that there was an appetite for this sort of thing. That if we could sort of bring really kind of good quality, like a mixture of long form and analysis, tactical stuff, we could sort of bring a mixture of stuff that wasn't really being done by other outlets, and just do it really well, and have it on a website that wasn't kind of cluttered with adverts, and just sort of kind of worked in tandem, I suppose, with the subscribers, and said, well, what do you want to read about? What sort of subjects interest you? What about Hibs is not being covered that you have always been curious about? But at the back of my mind, there was a sort of like nagging fear that people would say, why should we subscribe? Why should we pay money for this? We can get this from, the Record, the Sun, the Evening News, whatever. And I think there's always that fear that, people are just going to stand and point and go, you're just sort of rearranging the deck chairs. It's exactly the same as what it was before. But I think, like Liam's saying, just really kind of overwhelmed with the initial response. And I think that's kind of carried on where, people have been signing up, and, just, I suppose, the feedback as well. Like, we've had folk coming up to us at Easter Road and sort of saying that they really enjoy what we're doing. I've had people coming up in the street outside the stadium and just sort of saying, I really like what you're doing. And that's, I mean, journalists don't often get that. If anything, they usually get the reverse.
Yeah.
So that's been quite nice. It's nice to feel that, there is that support from the fans who, obviously are parting with their hard-earned cash for what we're doing. And, again, just to reiterate what Liam was saying, we sort of appreciate that people are kind of almost taking a punt with us, and they are, paying us money. And obviously in return, we want to make sure that they're getting the best content they can about, their favourite club. And I think the first sort of few months has been good. And it's just, from my point of view, I think we can always do better. There's always another level to aim for. And I think we've got a few things in the pipeline at the moment that I'm sort of really excited to get out there to the public, and just hopefully just sort of keep it going from strength to strength, and just sort of those who maybe haven't been convinced to sign up yet will hopefully be convinced by some of the stuff coming up, and hopefully we can just continue to grow.
Yeah, actually, as Patrick was telling me that he was in his car in the Clyde Tunnel a couple of weeks ago, and a guy in a maroon jersey came up and knocked on the window. And he said, listen, Patrick, I'm a Hearts fan, but you've been a breath of fresh air up here.
Colin, you're looking like you didn't get the reference. Brendan Rodgers did it. Brendan, first spell at Celtic. Oh, no. Brendan Rodgers had that story. It's why you're looking confused there.
Aye, I was thinking, what's this? I'm never read this in the paper.
I don't know whether Patrick was telling the truth there when he told me that story, but I'll let you decide.
How difficult, Patrick, you said about rearranging the chairs. How difficult is it to produce good quality content that's fresh when so much of the sort of the media narrative is sort of driven by the club these days?
I think it's easier if you've got the time and the resources, which I think at the moment we do have. And I think one of the pieces that I think was sort of most well received in the sort of first few weeks was I did this sort of 3,000 plus word sort of piece with Ben Kinsell and Murray Milligan, sort of head of commercial at the club, and it's sort of really, really kind of granular stuff. Really sort of drilling down into the partnerships and a lot of the off-field stuff. It wasn't really a great deal of sort of on-pitch stuff involved, but I mean, just the impact that had, just in terms of people who were reading it and how many people kind of signed up off the back of it was sort of phenomenal. And I think at the moment it's really about identifying things that people want to read about, no matter whether that's something to do with a player, whether it's something to do with the manager, maybe the coaching staff, or something that's maybe a little bit away from the norm, like talking about the commercial side of things, or this isn't something we've done, but for instance, just sitting down, I'm doing a long read with Stevie, the head groundsman, something like that, sort of things that the club aren't really doing and other papers aren't doing. Like we could never have really done something like the commercial piece at the Evening News, for instance, because it was such a big piece, and I kind of wrestled with the idea of putting it out in installments, and which is what I would have had to have done if I'd done that with the Evening News. It would have been sort of like a week of stories, and then by that point people start to get a bit bored and fed up, and it's all very very kind of samey. But in the end, I just sort of took the decision just to go with it, just whack it all out in a oneer. And I think just being able to read everything just in one place with all the background and all the detail that you maybe would have to cut if you had a word count to work to, just sort of really helps. It helps sort of like get a subject across, and you can put stuff in about background information, and sort of helps people kind of gain a greater understanding of the topic. And so I think from that sense, it's really quite straightforward. But I think there are also times, especially when like this sort of this month's a good example. Obviously, you've got the transfer window, but aside from that, you don't have games or press conferences to kind of rely on and say, right, well, we can get X amount of content from there. So then it becomes a bit of a sort of mad dash trying to find topics to write about that are maybe relevant to January, or relevant to the transfer window, and just sort of, I suppose, trying to convince people to talk to you, and trying to get a new angle on things, or trying to just do something a bit different that people are going to want to read and want to find out about. So yeah, it's not sort of difficult once you've got the subject and you know what you're writing about. The hard part can sometimes be in kind of tracking people down and getting hold of them and hopefully, or hoping that they're going to give you something good, that they're going to be really good to sort of speak to and to listen to.
And assuming you didn't get invited to Dubai, then was that like a decision not to go? Like,
it was closed to them. It wasn't no media involved, wasn't there? Yeah.
No media at all. No, because they've not even taken their own. I don't even think Hibs TV are over there. Like the guys like Adam and that. I don't think they're even there over. But
I think there are some people over there. But yeah, it was very much sort of closed shop. Which I think kind of makes sense. You want to get the club away from, or you want to get the team and the players away from the kind of media bubble and the spotlight. It makes perfect sense. You can focus more.
You still made the numbers up in training, though. You know what I mean? If you sort of
got a game.
that is true. That is true.
Do you still get the same access like that you had? Obviously, Evening News, like it was like you got all the access. Did that sort of transfer with you as an individual, or do you find it harder to get? You probably need more access now than because of the kind of stuff you're putting out. But what's it like? Is it? Do you find it easier?
I think it's probably on a par with what it was. Although, I mean, rather than that just being a case of me rocking up and saying, I'm from the local paper, let me in. It was, I sort of worked hard to try and like cultivate relationships with, the likes of Adam and Ben, obviously the managers, and just I suppose anyone really, and just trying to get across and say, look, I'm not sort of just I'm not a tabloid journalist looking for an easy headline or something like that, which is that seems to be a lot of the kind of thinking that the people at the club have. Certainly not what I think. But there was this sort of not suspicion, but like it was quite guarded. And then I think you sort of point out that actually, I can be useful for you guys, you can be useful for me, and you sort of set up a relationship, and it's a kind of mutually beneficial one. So I think that's, I think it kind of came with me because I didn't want it to be. I didn't really set out for it to be like this, but I suppose in the end it was more kind of like my relationship with Hibs rather than the Evening News's relationship with Hibs, and I'm benefiting as part of that. It was very much sort of me trying to do it on a kind of one-to-one on a personal basis because I felt that was probably the best way of doing it, and I think that certainly helped from the point of view of sort of maintaining those relationships now that we're doing the Observer. But I mean, Hibs have been. I suspect people from Hibs will be looking in. So if they are, things could be better, but they are sort of good in terms of getting access to players and to like officials. Like they are good. Like usually with that, and they're sort of happy to accommodate any of the sort of slightly more bizarre requests that we sometimes have.
So what is the sort of day to day like, Patrick? Sorry, Matthew, but what's your sort of you guys day to day like? Obviously. What days do you work? What do you do? Tomorrow morning or today? Do you work a Sunday? I don't know. But
did you get the official answer, or the one that the boss hears, or the other one?
12-hour days, 7 days a week.
Overworked.
We're never not working, I think, is the best way.
Yeah. Oh, you never switch off.
It's not. It's never a 9-to-5 job, no matter how much you try to make it like that. Obviously things have changed a little bit from like my time at the Evening News, for instance, and I suspect probably from when Liam was working across different things at the Herald prior to the Observer, that there's you get time to work on things. So rather than at the Evening News, it might be a case of right, we need sort of like a newsy story from you, we need like a double page spread, and we need like another 500 words, which is fine if there's a lot going on. If there isn't, then you're kind of panicking slightly. You're sort of thinking, okay. And, it sort of calls to mind when you were at school and university and you're thinking, right, I've got to make up this word count. So you just start putting in and things like that, like really kind of scraping the barrel. And it's very different now. And it's, Liam will attest to this, that there are times when you can spend like the best part of a week just working on one article, whether that's sort of, speaking to people on the phone or just sort of doing research or, reading up on financial terms and conditions, which is, I feel like, what I've been doing quite a lot of recently. So I think you can, Friday was a good example where I sort of, from very early on in the day, I was sort of quite confident that it was going to pan out in a certain way. And then by, I think, 3:30, all of that had completely gone out the window. So like a planned interview didn't go ahead. And then there was obviously transpired that Montgomery was doing sort of stuff at Hibs TV. So it was like, oh, okay, right. So that sort of, necessitated a whole kind of change in approach. And that happens a heck of a lot more than I personally would like it to. Obviously, days when there's press conferences, it's much easier to kind of plan it because you think, right, I know that's going to happen at this time. I know we're going to get 2 or 3 pieces out of it. But I think it's days like this when there isn't, there's maybe a break, like, or international breaks earlier on in the season. And with the best will in the world, you can sort of sit down and say, right, this is how my day's going to go. But don't know about Liam, but for me, it rarely goes like that, because there'll always be somebody trying to rearrange a phone call, or can we push that back to this day, or something else lands on your lap, and or something happens, and so there's not like no 2 days are the same, as much as I think we'd like them to be at times. It certainly feels a lot less kind of hectic than it did for me previously. Obviously, there are still days that are quite chaotic, but I think it's gone from being sort of quite chaotic to being that it's quite relaxed now, when things go to plan.
Yeah, I think the main difference for me has been, and what I've kind of enjoyed is not necessarily always having that sort of strict newspaper deadline, because if you didn't have something done in the space of a day sometimes, and there was something really needed for the paper the next day, you would maybe just have to file it as it was, even if it's not quite what you wanted it to be. Whereas obviously we need, it's not just like we can go days without doing it, without publishing anything, but there's not that kind of, you need to do this by 10:30 tonight, or the paper doesn't go out type pressure, which means you can, for kind of various pieces, you can take a bit more time over it. You can afford to wait. You can maybe ask a second or third person if they want to speak on it. Like, think that we did something near the start about how, Hibs signed Frank Sosey, and you could do that over the space of a week. Spoke to a couple of different people. You can make it kind of, you don't have the word count, limit as well. So it's kind of, you get a bit more sort of freedom, I think. And obviously, I think one of the things we wanted to do when we set out was, to make sure, like everything was as good as we could be. I think the thing I kind of wanted to get across to folk when we started it is that we were, we wanted people to see that we were taking care with everything that we were trying to do. It wasn't just, throwing stuff out for the sake of it. And certainly not having to work to like a sort of strict newspaper deadline helps you do that, I would say.
Right, we're almost out of time. So if this was the last question, is like a hypothetical scenario. If you had the opportunity to break one story in the Hibs world between now and the end of the season, what would your dream story be? Patrick, I'll get you first and then your answer, Liam.
So when you go to Liam first, I'll kind of think about it.
That was a nervous half second there to see who you were going to go to first. Now I can just say the same as whatever Patrick says.
It's a difficult one because I think with the transfer window, if Hibs end up signing someone quite kind of unexpected, then, if we get the nod on that and we could sort of say, I suppose it was the closest thing I can think of was the Lavondra stuff, which I kind of got wind of and put out there, and everyone was like, oh, yeah, Hibs been trying to sign him for 15 years. What is this, Football Manager? Mm-hmm. And then lo and behold, the next day there he is, with the, well, not with the scarf above the head, but with the shirt on. And so that was quite good fun that, this sort of story, like the story that maybe people thought was kind of pie in the sky actually turned out to be accurate. So, someone like that's good. If it's someone else who's been really kind of under the radar, who maybe, hasn't been in Dubai, but, the club brings in, something like that would be good. Or I suppose potentially the Bill Foley stuff, if there's something that comes out of that, that actually is going to put in X amount of money and, it's like an eye-watering amount, something like that. I know this is really, really dull and really boring, but like I say, if you got to Liam first, I could have come up with something better. So
well, let's go to him and see if you come up with anything better after that.
Pressure.
Bill Foley convinces Lionel Messi to finish his career at Hibs. Let's go for that.
Okay, that.
Can't think of anything serious, I'm sorry.
Probably might got something about Ben Kensel and sunbeds, or like some scandal there. But never mind. Right, we're out of time, Patrick, and thanks very much for joining us this morning. I know it's like a kind of shitey thing to do on a Sunday morning, so we appreciate you joining us and really enjoying the content of the Hibs Observer. It's been really, really good, and if anybody's not already a subscriber, I would definitely recommend to go and check it out. Colin, thanks for your time as well, and we'll be back with extra time on Wednesday. Like I say, we're going to be talking about Hibs transfer or activity or lack of it this January window, so go and subscribe on our Patreon or now on YouTube or on Hubwave, and you can get that as well. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Well, they trailed me down when I broke free. I drank all the whiskey in Tennessee. I don't drink what I know.